All right, this is part two of E2, our economic system section. And we're looking at specific sections by name: capitalism, socialism, and communism. We hear about these a lot, and now we're going to understand, well, what do they mean when we're looking at the economy and producing goods? So here we go. We will start with capitalism. Capitalism usually, for the most part, has a market economy or a mixed economy. We'll get in that a little bit. So capitalism starts off by a man named Adam Smith. He created a book called The Wealth of Nations in 1776, which was a groundbreaking book in the way that we looked at the economy and we understood how people should act towards each other. And he said this: every individual, therefore, endeavors as much as he can so to direct that industry that is produced may be of the greatest value. He intends only his own gain, and he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. The main idea of Adam Smith is this: society works best when government allows individuals and businesses to do what is best for them. His idea was, if we are focused on ourselves and doing what's best for us in terms of buying resources, making resources, we're going to do better as a whole. That's the concept here. Now, is it controversial? Sure, but it is the core of what capitalism is all about. So Adam Smith believed that the competitive market system provided a powerful invisible hand that ensured resources would find their way to where they were most valued. And so it relies on the economic self-interest of individuals and firms and will result in a desirable social outcome. So if you work to make profit, if you work to do the best for yourself, everybody will benefit. That's the process. So characteristics you see in a market economy, which is a capitalist economy. Here we go. Number one, limited or no government control. For the most part, the government stays out of it, and businesses have the opportunity to do what is best for them. Okay, so if we think about Adam Smith, let's look at Nike. Okay, Nike chooses to have its shoes made overseas, and the reason is simple: it's a lower production cost. So if they can sell a pair of shoes for $100 and make it for $20 in China as compared to $60 in America, well, they're going to do it. And maybe they reduce their price to $90. So you limit government so that the businesses have more ability to work the way they want to. That's the first idea in capitalism. Number two, freedom of enterprise. The freedom to use your ideas and create your own business. Culver started in Sauk Prairie, Wisconsin. He had the idea he's going to do something different with ice cream, and he's going to put some butter on his burgers. And look how well it's done. When I was younger, there weren't many around. Now they're everywhere. Jeff Bezos, Amazon. Amazon started as an online bookstore. Now look what it is. And so you have this freedom to do what you want, how you want to do it as a business owner. Number three, freedom of choice. Think about the different things we see, right? Some people are Ford people, or they're Chevy people. Some will only drink Pepsi, others will only drink Coke. Some are Android fans, some are Apple fans. In capitalism, you have the right to choose. In a command economy, in a communist economy, you probably wouldn't have these options, but you do here. Profit incentive. You are working as a business with the goal to make more money, to become more profitable. And success equals higher profits. And so that's a big part of it. And that's what drives companies. And that's what drives innovation too. Companies want to have better equipped products so that more people will buy them. And so they make better products over time. Think about cell phones. A cell phone today is more powerful than computers that used to take up a whole room. And that's because they know they have to get better or people aren't going to buy their product anymore. And if they can get better, they'll make more money. Private property. The idea that individuals can own private property, businesses can own their private property, and the government can't tell them what to do with that. This is core to capitalism. The idea of the government owning property is very scary for people who like capitalism. And six, competition. Target. Walmart, they're always competing. And in the end, what does that mean for you? Some good sales, right? If you think about all the different burger joints, look at this list of burger joints. It doesn't even have all of them. Culver's isn't even on there. But this idea that you have different businesses doing the same thing that are competing with each other, that should make them better. And hopefully it means for you that you can get some better prices and better deals. So those are your big six when it comes to the main ideas behind capitalism. But in reality, in America, we don't have a capitalist economy. It's mainly capitalist. For the most part, businesses can do what they want, but that's not always the truth, okay? So I'm gonna show you some pictures, okay? And you have to figure out, well, how is this a mixed economy? Well, if it's a mixed economy, we work with supply and demand, we're driven by our own self-interest, we have private property, but the federal government can put regulations in place to protect us. The government maybe will own some corporations, and the government will use some tax revenue to provide services for those that are poor. And so you see the mixture of the two, okay? Other government interventions, regulations, we talked about airlines. They might tax something like alcohol or cigarettes because it harms people. You see those kind of things. So we're going to look at how do we blend these two, free market capitalism and government intervention, which would be more of a socialist society. So look at each image and think of the ways the government regulates what's produced, regulates how it's produced, regulates what can be purchased, or regulates who can purchase it. So I'm going to go through a few pictures. Stop in each one and think about, all right, how is the government involved in this so that businesses can't just make their own decisions? So here we go. Airlines is your first one. Guns, your second. We'll talk about this one. You can skip this for now. Vehicles, home building, fast food, fishing. So let's run through these real quick. How is it involved in airlines? Well, there's a ton of rules the government puts in place for airlines that they have to follow, right? Your pilot has to be qualified. You can only have so many people in the plane. There has to be so many life jackets. There has to be safety equipment. There has to be checks on the airplane. All of that is required by the government. If we were a total capitalist economy, airlines could run however they want. They wouldn't even have to do safety checks, but they have to because the government is involved, government intervention. Guns. If we were a free capitalist economy, you'd go buy a tank, you have your own machine guns, your own bazookas, you get whatever you want. But we don't. The government gets involved and the government limits what is allowed and what isn't. Classic example of this is after a shooting that we had a few years ago, they eliminated the bump stock, which allows you to shoot faster. That's government intervention. Water gremlin. If you're a fisher, you might have used their lead weights and sinkers. Well, it turns out that they were produced in a pretty bad way. This story talks about how they had been releasing toxic chemicals into the atmosphere. Now, in a capitalist system, that would be fine. There wouldn't be punishment for that. But with government intervention, the company will pay $4.5 million in fines, work with the community, things like that. So the government can set up the regulations for how a business is allowed to run in terms of pollution. Cars, trucks. There's so many safety features they have to meet. They have to meet quality assurance tests. They have to meet mileage regulations. All these different things the government sets in place. Sometimes at the national level, sometimes at the state level, like California has high emission standards. And so we see this. The Trump administration wants to freeze gas mileage standards, reversing Obama. By the 2020 model year, the target for cars will be 41.7 miles per gallon, and light trucks will be 31.3 miles per gallon. This is written in 2018. Automakers had argued that during a midterm review completed by the Obama administration before he left office, that the out-year targets should have been revisited with low fuel prices changing American buying habits. Trump's then EPA administrator, Scott Pruitt, announced in April just such a move to take another look at the standards. So government has to decide, all right, the minimum miles per gallon you can get is what? And the Trump administration have a very different idea than the Obama administration. And sometimes it changes when you have changes in leadership. Housing, there's so many codes. There's so many rules. If you're going to have a basement, you have to have egress windows that you can get out of. If you're putting in, drywall, there's certain standards. If you're going to put cement, there's certain standards. There's you have to have plumbers and electricians that meet all qualifications. All of this is set in place by state, local, and national government. Fast food, think about what they have to do in terms of washing their hands, maybe wearing hairnets, temperature checks on food, how long food can sit out. All of that is regulations put in place by the government. In fishing, government says when you can fish, government says how much you can take, government says that some things are allowed and others aren't, like spearfishing kind of fits in that category. So all these things fit together for government regulation. So for your notes, pick a few of those and talk about how the government is regulating what's going on. So now we get into a different system, socialism. Socialism works more with a command economy. So the first person we're going to talk about is Karl Marx. Now, Karl Marx believed the bourgeoisie, the capitalists who own the means of production, such as land, machines, buildings, capital, they took advantage of the proletariat to make a profit. What does that actually mean? Well, it basically means this. The owners were keeping all the money and the workers were left poor. He didn't like that. He didn't like that about capitalism at all. And realistically, that's what you saw in the Industrial Revolution. You had the wealthy factory owners taking advantage of the workers because they could. And so he feels if you're going to fix this system so that the owners don't have power over the workers, you need a revolution, and probably a violent revolution. So if you want everybody to be equal, you need a violent revolution. Now, the big question is, was he right? Or is he out of date? So let's take a look at this video here and see what it can tell us about if his ideas actually
your own piece of property,
work.
Your own getaway.
Of course, we'll have a little ad here first. Sorry about that.
Whitetail property.
So here we go.
Karl Marx is often described as one of the greatest thinkers of the 19th century. His writings have inspired revolutions and generated centuries of fierce debate. Born in Prussia, now Germany, in May 1818, Marx believed that capitalism, which was in its infancy at the time, had serious flaws. Marx claimed that in pursuit of profit, capitalists would encourage their ideology that work is good, leisure is bad, and material things will make us happy, embracing mass production, depriving workers of job satisfaction, at the same time exploiting the working class. He became involved in the Communist League, a small group of intellectuals who wanted to abolish the class system and spread wealth equally. Marx wrote the Communist Manifesto in 1847 with his benefactor Friedrich Engels, laying out the Marxist vision of a society where wealth is distributed evenly. Property is owned publicly, and education is free for all. But Marx was little known and little read at the time. When he died in 1883, only 11 people attended his funeral.
Poor guy.
After his death, his ideas flourished. Based on the theory of Marxism came communism, the realization of a stateless society where all are equal. Communism became a global movement, but the utopian ideal of a fair and equal society failed to materialize. Communism tyrannized and impoverished its subjects and slaughtered them in the tens of millions. Today, capitalism dominates the world. But many of Marx's criticisms have never been more relevant. Today, the global disparity between rich and poor is striking. Marx predicted that capitalism would lead to the rich getting richer and the poor staying poor. He was right. He also predicted that capitalism would lead to boom and bust economics. Marx predicted that capitalism would lead to globalization and that a handful of firms would have huge market dominance. However, Marx underestimated the ability of capitalism to make everybody richer by making products much cheaper. Since the 1980s, the number of people in absolute poverty has fallen by about 1 billion. He also got wrong the capacity of capitalism to reform itself by creating welfare states that redistributed wealth through taxation. Although there is a lot to learn from Marx, his solution was far worse than the disease. At the same time, it can't be said that today's capitalism, dominated by immense inequality and financial crises, has triumphed.
So when you look at his ideas, some of the things that he was all about, yeah, they panned out. In others, not as much. So his idea is you have this classless society where everybody is equal. And the solution then is communism. Okay, so socialism is the idea. It's the idea that we're going to make everybody even. So here we go. My best explanation, because it gets tricky. Pure socialism is a redistribution of wealth to remove as much as possible of class differences. The value is equity and equality. And you'd have a command economy. There'd be very little private property. The state would own everything. And the goal for this is that this ownership by the state would allow products to help all people within the country to be equal. However, we haven't seen this work. Most of the time we have pure socialism, people call it communism. And unfortunately, what we've seen is that dictators and other ruling parties have taken over. And so instead of the wealth going to everyone, it's ended up in the hands of government leaders, while everybody else is pretty poor or lives in poverty. So we haven't seen socialism at its purest form ever really materialize. That just hasn't happened. Now, there are some different ideas in socialism. Sometimes you hear about democratic socialism, and that's the idea that you're going to use the democratic system to help citizens to have more control in government and business. Yeah, the government might own businesses, but what if the government is controlled by the people? It's a little different idea. They don't believe there should be a centrally planned economy where the government controls everything, but they do believe that some industries maybe should be controlled by the government so they can help people out, like energy and medical care and insurance and transportation. Maybe if the government owns it, we can make sure that everybody's equal. That's the thought process there. And they believe that capitalism should exist for most industries. However, ownership should be in cooperatives where workers in those companies have more power. So it's not one person owning the company, it's a lot of the workers. So a few people we've seen that have had these ideas. Okay, you may know them. The first one, Bernie Sanders. He talked about free tuition at public universities. That would be an idea that fits with socialism. Elizabeth Warren has talked about breaking up tech companies like Amazon and Facebook that have become too big so that they don't have too much control. And Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has talked about the Green New Deal and providing more renewable energy for everybody so that everybody will benefit from that. So these are ideas in democratic socialism. Some people agree with it, some people don't, and that's okay. We can have different opinions. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, sometimes you hear about a welfare state, and that's when you blend capitalism and socialism to try to create equality. So you're going to use tax money from everybody to provide services for everyone. Now, usually people think of welfare and they think of, it in a negative sense. Oh, people are feeding off the system and they're taking advantage of it. That happens sometimes. But we see this welfare state in different ways. The K-12 public education system, what you're a part of right now, is part of socialism because everybody benefits. Fire and police protection, unemployment benefits, disability benefits if you get hurt, food stamps, Social Security, which your grandparents may have. All of those are examples of this welfare state where you have capitalism, but some of that tax money goes to make sure everybody's okay. And then we see authoritarian socialism. And this is when you have a government that is in complete control. You have to be strictly obedient to it and you lose your personal freedoms. And that often happens with a dictator. The government moves towards pure socialism by nationalizing industries. So in Venezuela, the oil industry was nationalized, which meant the government was in charge of it. However, we also see that then one dictator takes control of that. They fix prices, they force companies to do what they want, and it can get pretty dicey. It's not a situation that you want. Basically, you're arguing you're going to make everyone equal, but then a dictator takes over everything. And lastly, communism, which should be pure socialism, but it necessarily isn't. What you have to have for this is pretty crazy. You have to have the people have to revolt against the government and overthrow the government, which is usually very violent and bloody. And they put a communist government in place. And the government controls everything that is made. They own the industries. They own the property. They set the prices for goods. They set wages, all of that. And there's no private property. Now, the idea here is they're going to do this so they can spread the wealth to everybody. But we just haven't seen it happen yet. Most communist governments have been controlled by a dictator or ruling group. If you look at the Soviet Union, they tried this. If you think about Joseph Stalin, he was a ruthless dictator. You crossed him at all, you're getting sent up north to a work camp or you're going to die. And so the idea that you can have a system that will have everybody equal and everybody cared for just hasn't materialized yet. We've seen some really good things with some socialist elements, but we've never seen the system the way that people like Karl Marx had thought it should be. So we've seen communism in China, Cuba, and the Soviet Union. And in each of those cases, we've seen people's rights trampled on, which isn't very good. So communism, as Marx saw it, would be a country that no longer needs a government or controlling powers because the people all work together as one. That's never happened. Greed is too big a thing for that to happen. So that's what we got. We're not going to worry about that last slide for now. If you have any questions, let me know. And this is the end of your E2 notes. Have a great day.